Thank you so much for joining Sharebird's The Essential Go-to-Market Show, tips and strategies, where we offer short video content and interview-style conversations with global product marketing leaders. I'm your host, Yasmin Tarehi. Now, whether you're an early-stage startup or a public company, almost everyone struggles with the same question. What does it take to have a successful product launch? Today, I'll be talking to Vanessa Thompson, the Director of Product Marketing at Twilio, and she's responsible for end-to-end product marketing and covers everything from positioning and packaging to market validation to go-to-market. And I'm very excited to welcome her to the show. So welcome, Vanessa.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Vanessa, can we just dive right in and talk about some of the major learnings and takeaways that you have had on launching a product successfully in market from either a go-to-market perspective or a positioning and packaging perspective?
Yeah, I love this question because it's so broad and it's so dependent on what your goals are. So I think the biggest lesson for me is if you think about launches, it's really a formula and you go through the motions and you update the website and you go through and train your sales team, and all of those things matter and are really important. But at the end of the day, you should have a higher level goal in mind that you're really charging towards. And so making sure that you're being creative and being thoughtful and extremely intentional, and all of those tactical activities that lead you to your goal are really what's going to drive you to success. And so at Twilio, we recently launched something we called Twilio Live, which is our interactive live streaming product. And this was huge for us because our ultimate goal was just to make sure that we're showing up in the market and that our whole developer community know that Twilio is in the video space and we can provide this kind of functionality and capability, and that any company or any tech company that's building software right now or that wants to build live streaming into their app experience or into their overall experience is able to do that with Twilio. And so ultimately our goals were awareness. So we wanted to get press, we wanted to make sure that we had a bunch of folks signing up for our private beta. And typically we would usually not launch something like this broad in private beta. We wouldn't usually say, okay, we're going to, at public beta or GA, we're going to do a big splash and do all of those things. We decided that this was the right thing for us to do for right now because we know that the market is there. We know that hybrid is here to stay, especially where we're at right now during the pandemic. And this was just the right thing for us to do to make sure that we're really reaching our awareness goals. And I'll say the PMM on my team that executed this launch did an excellent job at all of the fundamentals and the mechanics of getting the launch together. But ultimately, we really nailed it because our goal was to drive awareness. We got a ton of press hits and all of those kinds of things that really drove excellent logos into our private beta. So yeah, that's a good example of just balancing your goal with where you're at in terms of the product stage. Sometimes if you do launch too early and your developers can't get their hands on it, we're a developer focused company and we build products for developers. And so if they can't get their hands on it, that's a hard thing to do, launch something for developers that they can't get their hands on a keyboard on code right now. But we decided this was the right thing to do because we knew that the market was there for us. So yeah.
Very interesting. So, and how do you balance the right team structure, especially in this remote environment this last year? Like, how do you execute on a go-to-market with so many different types of teams that are distributed, that are remote? And also, like, who do you bring in from the company when it comes to a big launch? Is that something that you decide for every launch, or do you have a specific team structure already in place?
Yeah, so the way that my team is structured is kind of in two dimensions. One is around the key products that they support. So the PMM that was working on this live launch, she is focused on our video products. So she already has access to, the sales specialists and the product team and all of the folks end to end that would really help her execute on this. And then across the business, I've got a crew that looks at messaging and the email and account security. So we're organized by product, but I also have a set of folks that sort of sit across the team. I have somebody that works on sort of bottom of the funnel technical content. I have a couple of folks that are out in the regions actually, and they own product marketing for their local market, and they look across all of the different products. And so there's a few dimensions just where we're at in terms of the stage of growth mean that we need to sort of do both, be a product expert and specialist on your area of expertise, as well as have that platform-based approach.
Super interesting. And what about in terms of knowing that you had a successful launch? How do you track that? Is it done at the executive level? Is it done sort of at the sales level? I mean, you mentioned that in this last example that awareness was your goal. How do you kind of know that a launch is successful? I think a lot of people ask that question, and it's really hard for a lot of companies to understand what the metrics are around each launch, because a lot of it also could be a mix of art as well as science, right? I always say, like, you don't actually know when a launch is necessarily bad, but when you don't have the proper go-to-market fundamentals. So yeah, I'm just curious, like, what has been your experience in measuring the success of a launch?
Yeah, so in my mind, there's two key parts. You truly won't know how successful your launch is until you have revenue coming in from companies that have picked up that new product. And in some companies, their awareness to lead, to opportunity, to deal close, to revenue is really short. In other companies, it's really long. It's like 2 years. So in some cases, it might be like 2 years until you know, gosh, we launched this thing. Maybe it wasn't quite the thing that we should have done. And in some ways, like PMMs and doing a great launch, part of it is leaving your legacy and like making sure that everything that you're doing, not only on launch day, but after launch day, is all in support of your goals. And so I will say that kind of thing hanging out there that we have to keep in the back of our minds, because there's only so much that you can learn right after the product launch. But I will say, if it really depends on your goals, and you got to be specific, and you also have to be intentional about the things that you can control. Like if you wanted to drive more signups, and you as a PMM were solely responsible for signups as a metric anyway, then that's a great goal for you. Make sure that you go in and say, okay, well, we would like 1,000 signups for this product launch, and I'm able to control and influence like how we capture signups, then that's great. If your product team owns signups and you don't, that's a really tough one for you, because like, how are you going to hold them accountable when it's something that you actually did and executed on? So really think about the things that are inside your control that you yourself personally can measure in the shorter term, but also don't get too worried if you know that there are customers moving through your funnel and that they're going to show up with revenue, because ultimately the success of your launch won't show up for a little while, but you have to be clear about those shorter term impact metrics up front. So yeah, it could be everything from web page views, signups, press hits, anything that's really aligned with your goals.
You just brought up another question for me, because this also comes up a lot. How do you work with demand gen and growth marketing teams as a product marketer? Because I think a lot of people in the industry, it's so fascinating to me. A lot of companies don't actually understand the nuances between the two roles, or they assume that product marketing does demand generation and the paid side, which is like really just a part of the larger go-to-market strategy. How do you work closely with those teams? Or maybe do you work closely with those teams? And what's been kind of your best practices working with growth marketing and demand gen?
Yeah, it's interesting. So on our side, I think we really try to zero in on making what we do scalable, because in a high growth environment, you can't really be in there instructing on day-to-day digital copy, or, you know, like, okay, we would like the copy on the sign up flow to look like that, right? I mean, if your PMMs are doing something like that, then you're directing them in the wrong place. And so I would say focus on things that have a scalable impact. And typically that is positioning and messaging to make sure that everybody is grounded in the key pillars of the way that you would like to go to market. And if you also have a really strong supporting company voice, whether it comes from your brand team or product marketing or whatever team that comes from, those two things together will really help the PMM team scale the impact. So to answer your question a bit more explicitly, it really depends on how well set up you are with the fundamentals around positioning and messaging, and then how you keep iterating on that and helping bring those other teams along. So a lot of our job as product marketers is influencing without authority. And if you're able to influence those other teams to bring them along on your journey, then you're doing things in the right way because you're having a scalable impact. And so I wouldn't say, like I said earlier, if you're in copy every day working with demand gen or digital marketing or growth marketing, you're probably doing yourself a disservice, and you could have a more strategic conversation if you were thinking about positioning.
I love that. I agree wholeheartedly. I actually even wrote an article called "No, you don't need a growth marketer. You need a product marketer first."
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people skip that and just go straight to growth. We just need a growth person. But I'm like, but you could have early growth, but then a lot of churn, or it's not as scalable. And you just presented that so beautifully. So thank you. Yeah, Vanessa, I want to talk to you about some of the resources or books or places where you find inspiration, and also people that you follow when it comes to learning more about product marketing. I mean, I imagine that most people right now are learning on the job, but are there other places that you can share with our audience that have been helpful or inspiring to you?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a contrarian product marketer in that I actually haven't been a career product marketer. I came into this job after doing a bunch of different things. I just kind of fell into doing product marketing. And so for me, it's actually a lot of skills that I learned in other disciplines that I'm bringing into my approach to product marketing. And the role that I had just prior to this, I was working with really large companies on customer experience consulting, and we were doing a bunch of journey mapping and design thinking activities and all of those. So for my team particularly, I bring a lot of design thinking ideas or activities into the way we think about solving problems. And it's been refreshing actually, because if you follow the pragmatic or PMA or any of the basic, like here's the template, do the things, like it doesn't quite get you all of the way that you want to get with the creativity that we need to bring in a company like Twilio. And so I found augmenting some of the fundamentals with this design thinking approach has really given us those breakthroughs where we've needed to kind of go deeper on personas or really tweak our messaging or kind of try and understand needs and wants. We were like, well, what's above the line? What's below the line? All of those kinds of things. We were kind of looking for that extra juice.
Yes.
So yeah, design thinking is something that I just really love to bring into our structure. And then interestingly, even before I'd thought about coming into product marketing, I attended a conference years ago. It must have been like 2013 or something. And it was Lithium Technologies, a community vendor. And they brought in April Dunford, and she did a keynote at the event. And it was really to help community builders think about how to pitch and position and all of those things. And it kind of got me thinking, gosh, why on earth would a community builder need to know about how to position their products or how to position their companies? But it kind of got me thinking, gosh, everybody in the company needs to know about how to position. And so if this is so interesting, and it started me into the, oh gosh, this is like a really cool discipline. It's something that's interesting to think about. But like I said earlier, there's such a scalable impact that you can have as a product marketer. And so to me, that was a turning point and something that was inspiring. And yeah, I've been following some of the things she's been doing since, also written a book, which I have not yet read, but it's on my list of things to read. So there you go.
I love that you mentioned April Dunford, because I just actually read, I'm in the middle of her book. It's called Obviously Awesome. And it was just recommended on Amazon. But yeah, I love it. I think her point of view is very different when it comes to messaging and positioning. And that's great. I actually mentioned her. I have another book coming out in 2 weeks, and I mentioned her in my book because I thought her book was so fantastic. Awesome. Well, Vanessa, I could talk to you all day. I know that we're sort of out of time, but is there any kind of last takeaways or anything, in terms of being a great product marketer that you want to tell our audience before we end?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just earlier today, I've been doing a bunch of interviews and I'm hiring for a bunch of PMMs. But the one thing that I always ask in my interviews is, what is your PMM superpower? Because the way that I like to organize my team is not just like people that are excellent at end-to-end product marketing, but I also want to assemble a team of like the Avengers. Everybody has their thing that they're really awesome at, and they can teach the other PMMs on our team how to be awesome at those things. But I also want to make sure that they continue to get better at the things that they're already great at. So My thing that I would leave you and your community with is really hone in on what your superpower is and try to maximize how awesome you are at that, because that is the single best way that you'll show your current company, or if you want to get another role, that is the single best way to show what you bring to the table in terms of PMM, because there are so many different skills in PMM required, but it's really good when you know where your strengths are and you're able to harness those.
I love that so much, Vanessa. And I just want to double click on that because you seem like a very awesome leader all around. I think a lot of people end up getting pigeonholed into one particular thing or feeling like they have to follow a framework. And that one thing that is not talked about in product marketing is that so many types of launches are incredibly exhausting and people also burn out at the end, right? So it takes the right team to encourage people to stay the course, right? And stay and continue and not feel the brunt of or the heaviness of a launch. And it's a short conversation, but I could tell the leader that you are. I love that you are this unconventional contrarian leader, because I have seen that really work super well, not just with product launches, but also with team dynamics and sustainability for human capital, which is, I think, something a lot of companies don't do well with. They just sort of think about people as commodities rather than human beings who are actually doing the launches. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you got it.
So where can people find you, Vanessa, if they want to follow you?
If you want to follow me, you can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter, Vanessa Tomps. So yeah, I hope you connect.
Great. And we'll leave your Twitter handle in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time, Vanessa. And you can stay tuned for upcoming shows with product marketing leaders from startups to public companies as they share some of their best tips and strategies on the go-to-market process. Send us a note. Tell us what you learned. Tag Vanessa, tag Sharebird. We'd love to hear from you. And for those of you who are looking for more material on go-to-market, you can check out my book, Product Marketing Debunked, or the Product Launch Product Marketer's Guidebook, which comes out soon. Take care.